Today's sermon is called Cast Your Cares Aside. And I'll begin with a story. I think about 37 years ago, if I did my math right, and my husband will correct me later if I'm wrong, on November 20, 1984, 1 month before my first marriage, I received a great gift. The gift came from a woman named Jennifer, who was my best friend at the time and with whom I worked. There are many stories of Jennifer and me, but eventually my friendship with her faded as I left the law firm where we worked together. I got married, I had children, and while Jennifer remained single, still looking for her life partner, we stayed friends for some time. Jennifer, a tall, gentle woman of grace and faith, would often babysit for us, but eventually our lives went in completely different directions. Truth be told, I believe Jen and I had a quarrel, in which, in the end, hastened our breakup. Several years ago, I got in touch with her on Facebook, where she reminded me that we had parted in anger, and right then I suggested that we make up. Well, she was puzzled, having considered our friendship over. Apparently, I gave her that impression. But I like to resolve problems and right the ship, so to speak. And so I spent time persuading her to see a resolution to the decades of impasse. And we slowly became friends again. As life goes on, we evolve. Sometimes we just see the light. And that happened in this case. In 1984, though, we were fast friends, and Jennifer and I frequently engaged in deep interpersonal discussions about work and men, and most importantly, why certain similar bad things had happened to us in our respective childhoods, given we were women of faith. And it was at that time in my life, while listening to Jennifer talk and cry one night, we were sitting in a jacuzzi, and she was weeping. I had an immediate sense, while sitting and listening, that one of my earlier traumas I had eventually worked through with grace, prayer, and a little therapy had provided me with the knowledge and the fortitude and inspiration to recognize what had happened to me and thus heal. Jennifer needed to grasp similar healing concepts at that time in her life, if not indeed at that very second. And in one of those inexplicably cogent moments of life that come upon us through grace and the Holy Spirit's intervention and help, I had a flash, and I shared with her my sense of her situation and how she could try to understand it in order to reach clarity, forgiveness, acceptance, and peace. In a nutshell, she listened and took heart, and after a long time, Jennifer was able to heal, and in her gratitude, she gifted me the book called The Road Less Traveled. Have you heard of it? Oh, good, nobody has. Oh, somebody's nodding their head, because I'm going to talk about this book. At that time in my life, a great time of evolution and introspection in my early 30s, and many of us go through those periods of our life, that book became like my second Bible. It teaches the path of spiritual growth. Its author, M. Scott Peck, a religious psychotherapist, died 18 years ago on September 25, 2005, at the age of 69. 2 years ago, I bought the Kindle version of the book. Don't ask me why, because I already had the original that Jen had given me and a sequel that Peck wrote, The Road Less Traveled and Beyond, already in my home library. His books are not hard to read, and he uses real-life examples of those whom he has treated, which allows for a real-life picture of the problem-solving that comes with faith-based psychotherapy. The gist of this book is this: The Road Less Traveled is about our spiritual growth, and the message incorporated therein is that only a few of us are taking the road to spiritual growth through the grace of God, for a variety of reasons, not the least of which is that such travel is hard work. It takes sincere openness to the outpourings of grace available to us and the desire to grasp its mercies, which change our lives forever. In the third part of this, as I said, his first book, and by the way, I brought the entire collection, and they're back on the coffee table if you want to leaf through them. In this, the third part of this book, he approaches the topic of religion and the commonly accepted views and misconceptions concerning it. And now you see why I am talking about his book. He recounts experiences from several patient cases and the evolution of the patient's notion of God, religion, atheism, especially of their own religiosity or atheism, as their therapy with Peck progresses. And the fourth and final part of his book was one of the most interesting to me, which I intend to share the gist of with you. It concerns grace, the powerful force originating outside human consciousness that nurtures spiritual growth in human beings, as he terms it. And I'll repeat his definition once again. For completely understanding the manifestation of grace for average humans like you and me is often not as easy as one might think, and it is critical for our comprehension of God within. Peck's definition of grace is the powerful force originating outside human consciousness that nurtures spiritual growth in human beings. In his discussion on the topic of grace, Peck describes the miracles of health, the unconscious, and serendipity, things that happen by mere chance, it seems, phenomena which Peck says nurtures human life and spiritual growth and is incompletely understood by scientific thinking, despite being commonplace among humanity. Theologically, the word grace is defined as the unmerited favor of God, closely associated with mercy and forgiveness. It is used more than 100 times in the New Testament, but only a handful of times in the Hebrew Bible. People are justified or put right with God by grace, which is received through faith. Now, Peck takes this definition a step further, sharing his perspective that grace is a force not of human design. This powerful force, he writes, originates outside of conscious human beings, being assisted by a force other than our conscious will. This force, he would write later in his book, is God's work. The book took off only after Peck hit the lecture circuit and personally sought reviews of it in key publications. It made the bestseller list, however, in 1984, 6 years after its original publication, and that was the year I first got married and the year that Jennifer gave me that book. This book had a huge influence on me. You can tell it's duct taped and it's a mess. Its pages are where I first began to comprehend grace. It's where I began to understand in practice the theories of true love and the blending of Christianity, science, and logic. Reading and comprehending The Road Less Traveled was like reading the work of a master theologian, only one who didn't speak in multisyllabic incomprehensible verbiage, as some theologians and biblical scholars will do. So you can imagine I was thrilled. I didn't have to wade through words I had to look up. And I felt I'd gained wisdom after having soaked it all in. Untouched for a long time, I pulled it off the shelf carefully, for it is duct taped together at the spine, and I brought it here to show you. Looking back on my history with this book, I can remember sitting on our love seat in the living room in the village of Glendora, California, book in my lap, fire burning in the fireplace with my 2 young sons across from me on the couch, trying to help them grasp the concept of accepting the difficulties of life and learning, how to view and master tough times, the ones that cause us to worry when they come along. This book crystallized for me, and hopefully for them, the significance of truth. Not only telling the truth to others, but seeing our own truths within us. It helped me teach my children why lying is not only wrong, it is self-defeating. I would like to say that neither of my sons ever lied to me again after those mom lectures, but if I said that, I could possibly be lying. That said, one never knows for certain, do we? I do know they seem to be more forthcoming with the truth after those fireside chats. In short, this is an amazing book, and I felt as I held it in my hands that I needed to share it with you. And at the end of this sermon, I will share with you a little bit more about what Dr. Peck says about the comprehension of grace and its relationship with God, and why we are free to cast our cares aside once we are truly in tune with the Lord. In Isaiah, the prophet speaks, but his words are those of a servant of God. This servant is in tune with God, the master teacher. He teaches as he has been taught, and for the first time, it seems, he understands that suffering is an integral part of the work of God. The reality for Isaiah was this: to be close with God means to be at odds with people, to suffer, which can produce fear and anxiety. And yet the closeness attained by being tuned into God brings joy sufficient to overcome those fears. I can't resist the metaphor presented here of tuning in to a distant radio station. You know it's there. And on a good day filled with nothing, you can hit the mark on your radio and listen to that far-off station freely. But on a day with a lot of atmospheric interference and noise, it's nearly impossible. Those days, like dark times in our life, are days when you must just trust that the end of the troubles will come. So don't worry and don't wallow in them as they arrive. They're going to keep coming, but we'll get better. As I told you in last week's sermon, dark times come upon us all. Whether we are confused, lost, doubting, worrying, hurting, or just merely anxious or unsettled. That's part of life in a fallen world. And Peck would say it this way. In fact, it's the first sentence in his book. Life is difficult. Our prophet Isaiah, who lived during the downfall of Jerusalem to the Assyrians and foretold its future subjugation by the Babylonians, could not agree more, I feel certain. Life is difficult. But we do not have to grope blindly as those without hope do. We trust God in the dark, and with the help of the grace and the Holy Spirit within us to give us strength, we take God's hand and we go. We go where he leads us. At the end of one of Peck's sections on the requirement of discipline for spiritual growth, it was also noted that the learning of something new, such as comprehending the meaning of God's grace, requires a giving up of the old self and a death of outworn knowledge. To develop a broader vision, we must be willing to forsake our narrower, childlike vision. In the short run, it is more comfortable not to do this, isn't it? To stay where we are, to keep using the same microscopic map to avoid suffering the death of cherished notions. But the road to spiritual growth lies in the opposite direction. Growth in the Spirit begins by distrusting what we already believe, by actively seeking and threatening the unfamiliar, by deliberately challenging the validity of what we have previously been taught and hold dear. In a profound way, this sheds light upon what Isaiah writes as he emphasizes turning to God with all our cares and questions. The author Peck reminds us that our very sense of disillusionment arises from the fact that we expect more of ourselves than our forebearers did of themselves. We grow impatient with not understanding, impatient with God for not being visible, impatient with the fruitlessness of endless searching that reveals, so it seems, very little. This impatience can cause despair to set in. But think of it this way. Human behavior that we find repugnant or outrageous today was accepted as a matter of course yesteryear, such as child slavery, child labor. So much has evolved through human history, and we are each evolving too. The Bible, my friends, is a living, breathing document, and the words of the Lord and the prophets are as fresh for us today as they were 2,000 years ago. I'm not the same Diana was. I'm not the same Diana I was 10 or 20 or 30 or 40 years ago. I am evolving through deep introspection, through applying my mental ability to comprehend the works of great masters from centuries ago. Because even while the human existence has evolved since the beginning of time, some revelations of the past ring as or more true today in their simplicity than ever before. You are all evolving too. We are all changing each and every day. To paraphrase what Greek philosopher Heraclitus said, the only thing constant is change itself. Peck gets me all worked up when he dives into defining this force that pushes us as individuals and as a whole species to grow against the natural resistance of our own lethargy. It is love, this force, Peck writes, which pushes us past our lethargy. And that love is defined as the will to extend oneself for the purpose of nurturing one's own or another's spiritual growth. Love drives growth when we are stimulated by grace. Peck repeatedly emphasizes that the process of spiritual growth is an effortful and a difficult one. This is because it is conducted against a natural resistance, against a natural inclination to keep things the way they are, to cling to the old maps and the old ways of doing things, to take the easy path. And while familiar, that path, I think, may lead us nowhere, while comforting that the path is circular, we end up right back where we started from. So remarkable then that Jesus commands us to take the hard path, for the easy path is the one that leads to trouble. In the 7th chapter of Matthew, we are called to make a decision and a commitment about the direction we will take. During Christ's Sermon on the Mount, these words will be found for those who look. Enter by the narrow gate, for the gate is wide, and the way is easy that leads to destruction. And those who enter it are many. For the gate is narrow, and the way is hard that leads to life. And those who find it are few. Everyone then who hears these words of mine, he said, and does them will be like a wise man who built his house upon a rock. And the rain fell, and the floods came. And the winds blew and beat upon the house. But it did not fall, because it had been founded on the rock. And great was the fall of the house built on the sand. And so it is with spiritual growth, as well as growth in our personal and our professional lives. This call to grace by the driving force of love is a promotion, a call to a position of higher responsibility and power, to be aware of grace, to personally experience its constant presence. To know one's nearness to God is to know and continually experience an inner tranquility and peace that few possess. This knowledge and awareness brings with it enormous responsibility. To experience one's closeness to God is also to experience the obligation to be the agent of his power and love, to imitate him, and to let his grace flow through us to all mankind. It says so on our marquee, doesn't it, Mark? Imitate Christ. Take a look at it when you drive away. The call to grace is a call to a life of effortful caring for others, to a life of whatever sacrifice and service seems required. It is a call out of spiritual childhood into adulthood, a call to be a parent unto mankind, Peck tells us. Today I reassure you that through the grace in your being, your own understanding and comprehension of what God means to you and for you can be had. But you cannot have it by merely accepting all which has been told to you by other human beings. You must explore. You must pay heed to your dreams, your serendipitous moments, and those unexplainable flashes of understanding that hit us from time to time. I think about Sina and the things she's told me when she feels God speaking to her. Heed these messages. And when we do these things, just like when driving in a whiteout or in a deep fog, which we've all done and probably wish never to do again, eventually, if we persist slowly and carefully, we will perceive that there is a light that shines brightly in the end. Jesus is that light. Jesus is that love. Jesus is the way. Seek and you will find the key that unlocks the door to casting your cares aside and follow the light that leads to truth. Be with me in prayer.